when ChatGPT first got released, right? It was released on November 30th. We were in the middle of our semester. And I started seeing the hype around ChatGPT on Twitter. And I first started experimenting with it probably about like 8 days later. It was revolutionary, so mind-boggling and so fucking amazing that I couldn't really sleep properly. There's like a lot of potential and whatnot. There's a lot that people can do with it. And I was really excited about it. And I was thinking of all sorts of ways to be able to monetize the whole thing. It's going to go such viral and it's going to be like the next Google. And I knew it. And I was like thinking of so many ideas of what can I do. And I looked up and I saw that there is that API available for ChatGPT. So I was like, okay, what if I decide to just create like some sort of app using the API? I was thinking of doing that. That's going to take too long to just even to come up with like front-end interface. And it needs to be fast. It needs to be like a very quick money-making hustle. There's no way it's going to stay secret. New fancy hype technology, everybody will be using it. What I thought, okay, what is the quickest way that I can actually make money? Because I was thinking from a totally monetary perspective. I just wanted to monetize as quickly as possible. I wasn't going to start a business or make an app around it. So basically I was writing one of my assignments and I realized that I really couldn't focus on my assignments. And I realized, okay, what if I decide to help students with ChatGPT? And like, how about that? That would be interesting. And so what happened overnight, I became a writing tutor. And it was already November. So that means most people will be done with most of their assignments. Probably will be able to get the last couple of assignments left for students. And I thought, okay, here's what I'll do. Instead of, making like a website or something, some sort of Facebook page, what if I just decide to market it through word of mouth? So that's what I did. I've asked my friends, tell their friends that there's this new service for anyone who's interested in doing their assignments fast and it's affordable for students. So my target customers were not serious students really, because serious students, they do their own work. My target customers were failing students or students who actually didn't go to class, who didn't know what was going on in classes. Probably didn't go to class for months. I spoke to my girlfriend's roommate and I asked, okay, look, there's no point in doing assignments that you really don't care about. How about you let me do that? I will do those assignments. What's the point of taking that much stress and pain to be able to just, sit down and do all those classes? Instead, pay a little bit. And then in the meantime, you could go and do work or go and hang out with your friends or go and prepare for your final exams or spend time in assignments that you're actually, interested in. I started doing their assignments. Now, because of ChatGPT, I was able to churn out like a very good paper for a course that I haven't taken, for a course that I know nothing about in like a day. So I did like 2 papers, about 1 to 2 papers per day, because I was still trying to figure out how to do the prompting. So I was able to churn out a killer paper within a short period of time. I did like philosophy, psychology, women's studies, social studies. I would do them because I knew what the final product would be. I did not cover any code assignments. I didn't cover any assignments that was related to science, like chemistry, biology. The reason is I just didn't know what the right answer is. I did not cover any assignments that like I had like no fucking clue about. I didn't cover any 4th year assignments. I didn't cover any 3rd year assignments. Most of the assignments were like 1st year and 2nd year. And the papers turned out to be really well. So most of the students, they got like B+ or A. And I'll tell you the reason. Back then, by December, the department wasn't aware of ChatGPT. So any paper written by ChatGPT was like top class paper. I would be able to verify whether the information generated by ChatGPT was correct based on some Google searches and some research. So initially the price was very cheap. One single paper was done like within $100. So give me like $100 and your assignments will be done pretty much in a day. It was pretty much guaranteed that doesn't matter if you go to classes or not, your paper will turn out great, as if you have went to classes. So that way I was able to help students out. The prices was higher, the closer the assignment was to the deadline. One time, there's a student who reached out to me. She found out about my writing services through a friend of hers, and she paid a ridiculous amount of money, which was like close to what her tuition cost. But she needed the service at the last moment, or else she was going to fail. She didn't have any final exam. It was just the final paper made all the difference. And I probably had like a day or so to get that one done. That paper did not bring her an A+ or an A. I check up with every student what marks they got after their submission. The reason I do that is because I wanted to get a feedback on how ChatGPT actually did, or let's say how I actually did. Because it's not about ChatGPT or the tools that you use. Like there's like other software, but it's all about how well I was able to use ChatGPT to craft a better paper. So some parts of the paper, I could not fully rely on ChatGPT. I had to rely on my own writing skills or my own research skills. There were some parts of the assignment that I needed to get done just by myself. There was one paper where I had to map out the different points in, it was like some sort of node graph where I had to be able to connect all the points together. Now that was easy with ChatGPT. So for me to be able to draw that map, I needed to read the whole paper, how ChatGPT mapped out all the points, and then manually create the map myself. Tasks like those were a fucking headache. Because once professors started to find out, or once the word got around, instead of changing their way of teaching style, what they did, they made the assignments far more challenging. So they would add like extra things, like how many search results there were, like stupid things like that, in order to just keep students in check. But that didn't stop them from actually coming to me, because I did those tasks myself. So those tasks would require about like 60% of ChatGPT work and 40% of manual labor. One of the biggest challenge trying to help students out with these assignments was making sure that none of the papers got plagiarized. And this was the most crucial part. I had to make sure some papers were shit. Students got the bare minimum, but I just had to make sure there was no way they could plagiarize this paper, because that could literally ruin a student's academic career if the TA found out. So in those cases, what I had to do, I had to come up with a couple of tactics in order to make sure the softwares that they use to check the papers do not flag anything. Or even if they flag it, they don't have a way to prove it, that the paper was written by AI. So I used some services that were available at that time that was able to detect the tokens and the perplexity, or it was like what percentage of the paper was written by human or AI. So I used one of those services in order to make sure those grading softwares would not actually catch the paper and deem it AI written. So I had to go through extra 2 or 3 different steps in order to make sure none of the papers, and when I say none, I mean none, 0 papers got red flagged by the checking softwares. Later on, I had to include intentional spelling errors, punctuation errors, and like some errors in regards to phrasing or grammatical errors in some lines or in some paragraphs. Basically, do everything I can in order to throw off the checking software. That was kind of like my technique to prevent that. This was a way to prevent a student from failing. And it was always the student who didn't go to class, or who did not participate in classes or in discussions, or who don't know what the fuck was going on in the whole course throughout the whole semester, and who came up to me in the last minute trying to get them to pass. Because think about it, if the student has not done well in the rest of the assignments, in the rest of the exams, and somehow the student did amazing in one paper or in the final paper, that's just something off. It totally tells the department, it totally tells the professor or the TA or the checker, whoever's checking, that the student did not write it themselves. So I had to make sure that whatever paper I write, I had to take it into account the student's previous records for that particular course. So the challenging part was not all of those paper was like a template. Each individual paper was very specific. The methods, the techniques, yes, some of them were similar, some of the prompts were similar, but each individual paper was very specific, and the way I had to craft it or the way I had to organize the information was very specific, highly curated, no matter who the student was. So each process was painfully difficult, especially later in the semesters, later after the word got around and the department tried to make the whole process far more difficult. And they added like 4 or 5 different extra steps in order to make sure the students actually do the work. But it actually didn't prevent students from actually giving out their paper to someone like me. There were a couple of tools that I used later in the process. So the first tool was, of course, the ChatGPT. And then I upgraded to GPT-4 version. And GPT-4 wasn't really that big of a deal, that better than the 3.5. Finding relevant and authentic scholarly sources, and which was linked directly to the answer, was much more easier in Microsoft's Copilot because it had the GPT-4 version. If you had like a 3,000 word essay, it's not going to do a very good job. So I used the Copilot just to outline the essay and to get all the scholarly sources that are relevant for that particular essay. And then I would take the outline, and what I would do, I would just plug that into ChatGPT, and because ChatGPT would have a larger token size, so it would like generate me, and I would just ask it to elaborate each of those paragraphs. Those processes were pretty similar for most papers. Eventually, there were like other papers that came about where professors specifically asked to refer to certain class notes or to certain parts or sections of a textbook. So there were like Google LLM Notebook that's available now, but it wasn't available when I was doing the writing. There was ChatDoc, allows you to just plug in a PDF and you could just like ask the PDF and you would pull out information. When I first started this, it was very tiresome. In the earlier versions of GPT, you couldn't really upload any documents or interact with any PDFs or documents. Now you can. Now it's more easy. I ended up learning a lot how ChatGPT would actually perform, or how it was performing, or what prompts worked the best. But it was such a painful task. So initially the assignments were easy, but later on, professors would make sure they would add in layers upon layers of extra tasks in order to make sure that the writing process gets difficult. So it was more about editorial process. And what I learned is that it's not about creation, really. It's more about directing. It's more about editing. Assignments were laid out in a way so that you already have the information. Let's say I had like 2 or 3 class notes, and there's a section or a couple of sections from a textbook, from a chapter in a textbook. There are like 2 or 3 different class links. All of those things, the information was there, but I had to know how to plug in those informations or upload those documents and pull out relevant information from each of those and then edit them or organize them in a way that would make a coherent argument. So that was the whole process of writing a research paper. It wasn't like you are writing a novel or a story. It was far too less about creation. It was more about finding the information and then organizing them a coherent argument and making up your points, or like it could be in an argumentative essay or in a research paper. That was basically what it was. I'm not a writer. I hate writing papers, and I don't write research papers. And my background is not writing. So what ended up happening is I got to learn more about how the whole editorial process works in a research paper. Because think about it in one way. Think this way. I'm a writing tutor who has no freaking idea what was happening in a course. I think someone who actually has ideas about the course and has gone through the course and goes to class, but if they are equipped with all of these knowledge about using AI in order to craft their paper, they'll be deadly, really. I mean, the way their efficiency would increase and they would get more work done in a short amount of time. So that helps students. University papers are less about creative papers, but more to do about pulling out informations, organizing those informations, and coming up with their own conclusion. Mostly that. So if the student actually knows what's going on in a course, they have like a general understanding of where certain information is. So it's more about like directing. You have to know how to direct AI into a certain direction in order to pull out one particular piece of information or one particular source. That is like the tough part. And another thing, ChatGPT makes mistakes all the time. I'm talking about the GPT-4 model. There were times I expected that it would get the most obvious answer. Like I knew what the obvious answer was, but it could not pinpoint me that exact answer that I needed it to use.